Avant de commencer, je tiens à souligner que les terres sur lesquelles nous sommes réunis font partie du territoire traditionnel non cédé des Algonquins. Je tiens à remercier les peuples Anishinaabe et à rendre hommage à ses aînés. Je reconnais également que de nombreux participants qui se joignent virtuellement à l'audience se trouvent à des différents endroits et peuvent donc se trouver dans un territoire traditionnel autochtone différent. Je vous encourage à prendre un moment pour y réfléchir. Au cours de cette audience, nous examinerons la demande de Rogers Communications d'acquérir toutes les actions émises et en circulation de Shaw Communications. Et en ce qui concerne uniquement les actifs de radiodiffusion de cet dernier, qui include Shaw's current ownership interest in CPAC, cable television services in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, the national satellite service Shaw Direct, the national satellite relay distribution service Shaw Broadcast Services, and Shaw Pay-Per-View. This proposed transaction is of considerable scope and would impact Canadians, producers, broadcasters, and the industry as a whole. Over 2 million Canadians subscribe to Shaw's cable service and satellite television services. Many Canadians stay connected to their communities through Shaw's community channels. Broadcasters and producers rely on funding contributed by Shaw for the creation of local news, community programming, and independent productions. As with all ownership transactions, we consider the merits of the application under the existing regulatory framework, and it is the responsibility of the applicant to demonstrate.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very sorry. We need to just wait 1 minute. We're having issues with the stream, so we want to make sure everybody hears your opening remarks.
Merci, Madame la Secrétaire. We'll just pause for 1 second. I was just getting up ahead of steam.
We will just test to make sure that we can hear us on the website. So I will just ask the technicians to confirm that we are streaming. Can you hear me? Can you hear me on the website? Can you hear me streaming? Yes. So I have the thumbs up. You may continue, Mr. Chairman. Maybe
Merci. I'll just go back to the preceding paragraph for where it dropped off. My apologies, or our apologies. As with all ownership transactions, we consider the merits of the application under the existing regulatory framework, and it is the responsibility of the applicant to demonstrate that a transaction is in the public interest. In this case, Rogers bears the burden of proof. As I've mentioned it previously, this application, and by extension, this hearing, strictly deals with the broadcasting component of the overall transaction announced by Rogers and Shaw. We understand that the transaction also involves Shaw's other business lines, including telephone, wireless, and internet services. However, we will not be reviewing any telecommunications-related matters during this hearing, as the companies do not require prior approval from the Commission. These elements will be subject to review by the Competition Bureau and by Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada. Therefore, I would ask interveners to focus on matters of concern to the application that is before us. The Commission will take into account the intangible benefits that could result from this transaction, as well as the tangible benefits in the form of financial contributions that would be made to the broadcasting system. As this transaction impacts the ownership structure and governance of CPAC, it has been granted the opportunity to appear in its own right to answer questions pertaining to these issues and its operations. Finally, I would like to assure all parties that the application will be assessed on its own merits. As always, the Commission will base its decision on the evidence on the public record and presented as part of this public hearing. Avant de commencer, permettez-
Before starting, allow me to introduce my colleagues. We have the following: Mrs. Claire Anderson, advisor representing British Columbia and the Yukon; Mrs. Norma Nadeau, councillor representing Alberta and Northwest Territories; Mrs. Monique Parentin, councillor representing Ontario; Mrs. Ellen Desmond, Commissioner representing the Atlantic and Nunavut regions; and myself, Ian Scott, Chair. The members of the staff are as following: Mrs. Lelièvre, Christina Maheu, Matthew Wells, and Mrs. Jadoir, Secretary. I would now ask Mrs. Roy to explain the procedures we will be following.
Alors, Madame la Secrétaire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et bonjour à tous.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Over a few housekeeping matters to ensure the proper conduct of the hearing. There is a verbatim transcript of this hearing being taken by the court reporter. Please note that the transcript of each day will be posted on the Commission's website the following business day. Veuillez noter que les documents.
Please take note that documents will be available on Twitter on the Commission's site using click CRTC.
Pursuant to Section 41 of the Rules of Practice and Procedures, you must not submit evidence at the hearing unless it supports statements already on the public record. If you wish to introduce new evidence as an exception to this rule, you must ask permission of the panel of the hearing before you do so. Veuillez noter.
Take note that if parties commit to table information at the Commission following questions, these commitments will be in the transcripts of the hearing.
5 days. We will advise you of any scheduled changes as they occur. Participants are reminded that they must be ready to present on the day scheduled, or if necessary, the day before or after, depending on the progress of the hearing. Please make sure to speak clearly in your mic, and if you are not speaking, put your microphone on mute. And now, Mr. Chairman, we will begin phase 1 of this hearing, in which we will hear the presentation by the applicant, Rogers Communications, Inc., on behalf of Shaw Communications, Inc., for the transfer of ownership of Shaw to Rogers. Please introduce yourselves, and you will then have 30 minutes to make your presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, and Commission staff. Thank you again for accommodating us during these extraordinary times. My name is Ted Woodhead. I'm Rogers Senior Vice President, Regulatory. We are pleased to be here today. Let me begin by introducing our panel. To my right is Dean Prevost, President, Rogers Connected Home. To Dean's right is Edward S. Rogers, Chairman of the Board of Directors of Rogers Communications. To Edward's right is Brad Shaw, Executive Chair and CEO of Shaw Communications. To Brad's right is Paul McAleese, President, Shaw. To my left is Pam Dinsmore, Vice President, Regulatory, Cable. In the second row, from your right to left, are Peter Kovacs, Director, Regulatory and Content Distribution and Broadband Policy, Rogers; Susan Wheeler, Vice President, B2B Distribution and Regulatory, Rogers Sports and Media; Eric Bruno, SVP Content and Residential Products, Rogers; Lisa Damiani, Chief Legal and Regulatory Officer, Rogers; Peter Johnson, Executive Vice President, Chief Legal and Regulatory Officer, Shaw; Dean Shake, Vice President, Regulatory Affairs, Shaw. The third and last row From your right to left are Robin Mirsky, Executive Director, Rogers Group of Funds, Julie Henson, General Managers, Rogers TV, Andrew Eddy, Vice President Programming, Shaw, Cynthia Rathwell, Vice President Legislative and Policy Strategy, Shaw, Paul Cowling, Senior Vice President, General Counsel and Regulatory Affairs, Shaw. With that, I will turn it over to Edward Rogers.
Thank you, Ted. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the CRTC and staff. My name is Edward Rogers, Chair of the Board of Rogers. I am honored to be here today to request your approval for the merger of Rogers and Shaw, two separate companies but one common vision for the future. My father, Ted Rogers, and Brad's father, J.R. Shaw, started their companies from almost nothing, invested and risked it all. They were visionaries, they were builders, they were incredibly proud to work, live, and invest in Canada. Both companies invested in the future and brought Canadians the latest and most innovative products and services. Although capital intensive and at times very challenging, both companies delivered to customers over many decades. And they delivered on the commitments to the CRTC, to investors, to debt holders, and to customers. I grew up like Brad in the business from the bottom up and learned early on that the licenses our companies hold are a public commitment and trust. Over the decades, when we give our word, we know the absolute importance of delivering on those promises. The commitments Rogers and Shaw will make around this proposed merger is no different. Our board, our management team, the 24,000 men and women across Rogers and I are totally committed to this deal. We will stand behind each and every commitment made here today by the various teams. Just like every other time that we have appeared in the past, we will always meet the obligations and commitments that we make. Canada is no longer an island in an ocean alone. We participate in an industry that is now more global than it's ever been, with global platforms that bring Canadians and people all over the world wonderful new products and services. But they can also pose a challenge to Canadian companies and Canadian culture. We need to make sure that Canadians have continued access to high-quality networks that Canadian companies can still add value. Canada has some of the very best wireline networks in the entire world. While our primary competitors are still Bell and Telus in the cable business, in this global world, our competitors are also increasingly global platforms and brands. As a country, we need to look at these global trends and understand how we can fit into them. Today's telecommunications networks need scale to compete on the world stage. We believe passionately that a combination of Rogers and Shaw will help contribute to a stronger facility-based future for Canadians. The promises we have made as part of the combination of Rogers and Shaw are bold, but it is what is needed. The talented teams of men and women across Rogers and Shaw buy into this vision and are so excited to be part of the future. This deal will benefit our customers and the future of our company, but it should and it must and it does also provide strong benefits to Canada. Rogers is proud of meeting our commitments for 60 years, and I pledge to you that Rogers will continue to do so and do so again here. Thank you, and I now turn it over to my good friend, Mr. Brad Shaw.
Thank you, Edward, and good morning. Before I start, I want to reflect on the recent tragic events that are impacting our customers, employees, family, and friends in British Columbia. While BC is a strong and prosperous province, it is truly suffering at the moment. Among the highways that are affected by the devastated flooding, there are hundreds of kilometers that do not have connectivity. We recognize that our industry has a role to play in British Columbia's recovery by investing in extended networks. I know both Edward and I strongly believe in improving connectivity in Canada. That is just a part of our shared vision that brings us before the Commission today. I'm excited to be here to talk about our decision to join with Rogers and why it will set Canada and its broadcasting system on a path to a very bright future. We are fully committed to this transaction. In 1970, my father, J.R. Shaw, embarked on a new venture and risked everything we had to launch Capital Cable in Sherwood Park, Alberta. Over the next 50 years, my family and thousands of hardworking employees across Canada built Shaw Communications into the company that it is today, delivering cable, satellite, internet, voice, and wireless services to millions of Canadians. My family and our employees are incredibly proud of what we've created at Shaw. For the past 5 decades, Shaw has been at the forefront of Canadians' broadcasting system, connecting Canadians with each other and the world. At every step along the way, JR, our family, and our employees have always put our customers and communities first. Our decision to combine our company with Rogers was no different. As we look to the future, something JR always insisted we do, it became clear that our company, our industry, and our country are at a critical turning point. Without significant network investments in wireline and wireless, it will be impossible for Shaw to meet the evolving needs of Canadians, expand to serve more communities, and continue to put the needs of our customers first. Simply put, Shaw cannot do it alone. We need the scale, strength, and resources of the combined Shaw and Rogers assets. By joining Rogers, we will expand and accelerate the multi-generational investments needed to close the digital divide and compete more effectively across Western Canada, while expanding competition to communities that currently have little or no choice. We remain guided by JR's encouragement to be bold, courageous, and thrive on change. Joining forces with Rogers not only makes sense for Shaw, it makes sense for Canada. Combining the complementary assets of our two companies allows Rogers and Shaw to invest so much more than the sum of what our two companies could do apart. Shaw is thrilled to join forces with Rogers, and together we will make a brighter future possible.
50 years ago, Rogers Communications and Shaw Communications, led by two pioneers, had a vision and a dream.
It's a great day for Canada to have this new high-tech industry start and be pioneered by Canadians.
A shared vision of a country united through communications by radio and television, cable, internet, and wireless services. A shared dream to connect Canadians across the country to each other and the world. Their vision and dream shaped the connected lives we live today.
When I saw cable start from a one-way, few channels, now to see it in hundreds of channels, two-way, phone business, internet business, I'm amazed.
And now as digital technologies radically transform our world, these two great Canadian companies are coming together to build on their legacy and prepare Canada for a digital future.
I'm a person who believes in looking at what's happened in the past. How can we make it even better in the future?
Together, Rogers and Shaw can do more than either company can do on its own. With the resources and scale needed to make the generational investments in networks and services that Canadians need to prosper in the global digital economy. Only by coming together can Rogers and Shaw accelerate the rollout of critical 5G networks across Western Canada, invest in additional networks, services, and technology, and connect more rural, remote, and Indigenous communities faster than either company could alone. Rogers and Shaw together will create up to 3,000 new jobs across Alberta, BC, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, and forge new partnerships to develop innovative ways to make more important connections possible, including bringing low-cost broadband to as many as 1.5 million seniors and low-income residents, and investing in the programming that matters to every Canadian and that our broadcasting system needs to remain strong and vibrant. And together, we'll make a more meaningful impact in our communities, building on shared culture, values, and purpose. As a truly national company, Rogers & Shaw will deliver more choice, more affordable services, and more world-class connectivity across Canada. Together, Rogers & Shaw will make more possible.
Ladies and gentlemen, the best is yet to come.
These two incredible families have strong legacies and a shared vision of Canada's future. That shared vision is one where all Canadians, regardless of their income or where they live, are able to realize their full potential in a digital world. It's a vision that is rooted in the values that Ted and JR instilled in their companies. Both companies have always put their customers first, embraced change and innovation, and worked to build a better Canada. This historic transaction will make world-class digital infrastructure possible for generations to come. There has never been a more important time for our industry and our country. Canada is facing a defining moment in its history as the digital revolution accelerates around us. While digital offers new opportunities to create jobs, diversify the economy, strengthen our innovation sector, and fuel Canada's economic recovery, it also presents enormous challenges. Among them is the growing digital divide that separates Canada's urban and rural areas, including our Indigenous communities, as well as the critical need to ensure that every Canadian, regardless of income or postal code, can participate in the digital world. Canada's ability to invest in a robust, secure, and competitive network infrastructure is critical to overcoming these challenges and securing Canada's future prosperity. The importance of investing in world-class networks was never more clear than during the pandemic. So many of us had to pivot to online work, education, health, and entertainment as in-person interaction suddenly shifted online. Our strong networks remained robust and resilient in the face of unprecedented demand because companies like Rogers and Shaw poured billions of dollars into their networks. We need to build on and increase these investments to address the challenges of the future. For Rogers and Shaw, those challenges are a call to action. By coming together, we will achieve the scale required to build national fiber and 5G networks. As a truly national network, we will provide critical products and services which will benefit Canadians in the West and every other region. By making generational investments in network infrastructure, we will accelerate adoption of next-generation platforms and services by all Canadians, including those living in rural areas and those with lower incomes. This is essential for Canada to compete on a global stage, and it is critical to the future of the Canadian broadcasting system and its ability to achieve the objectives of the Broadcasting Act. We will overcome the challenges of the digital age by making 4 key contributions. First, we will enhance competition. In coming together, Rogers and Shaw will bring true competition to the Prairie Provinces and British Columbia. Today, in many smaller communities in BC and Alberta, consumers do not have a competitive option to TELUS. We will provide that competition. When we announced our merger earlier this year, we committed to invest $2.5 billion to build 5G networks in the West. This is an enormous investment and one that Canada needs in the 21st century. By building more advanced wireline and wireless networks, we will accelerate Canada's digitization and energize the diversification of the Western Canadian economy. I recently visited communities in BC and Alberta and heard from residents about the challenges they face in areas where only one provider is present or connectivity is limited. I heard stories of residents who drove from the scene of car accidents just to get reception to contact emergency services. I also heard from a municipal leader who was forced to join a conference call on COVID response from a payphone. As the mayor of Prince Rupert said to me, we desperately need competition. Investing in robust networks and IPTV platforms will also foster competition within the broadcasting system. At its core, our application is based on the fact that Rogers and Shaw together, with greater scale, can compete more effectively against TELUS and Bell. It will also strengthen our ability to provide an alternative to the global media giants that are threatening the business models and sustainability of Canada's broadcasters and distributors. Second, we will help bridge the digital divide between urban and rural communities. Today, more than 2 million Canadian households cannot access broadband services. These Canadians live in thousands of smaller, often isolated communities that are on the wrong side of the digital divide. We will provide them with access to broadband for the first time. Countless community leaders and businesses in those communities have shared just how transformative that connectivity will be. Rogers will spend $1 billion to create the new Rogers Rural and Indigenous Connectivity Fund, dedicated to connecting underserved communities across the West. We are now consulting and working with Indigenous communities to understand their needs and identify sustainable local connectivity solutions. Earlier this year, I visited coastal First Nations in Haida Gwaii and the traditional unceded territory of the Lheidli T'enneh in Prince George. I heard powerful personal stories and firsthand experiences centered around connectivity needs. I heard the story of Brenda Wilson, whose sister Ramona was murdered in 1996 on Highway 16, the Highway of Tears. Brenda spent years trying to get justice for Ramona and told us just how important it was that we were listening and helping bring connectivity to the region. In conjunction with the BC and federal governments, we're now connecting the entire Highway 16. This is only one of the many stories that reinforce the deep responsibility we have to build a better future for Indigenous communities. The ability to make a call from a highway if your car breaks down or connect to Wi-Fi at a local rest stop is not a nice to have, it's a must-have. Our third contribution is to extend Rogers Connected for Success program, Canada's leading internet and TV affordability initiative to consumers across the West. This important program provides more affordable options to lower-income Canadians and other marginalized communities. It represents Rogers' long-term commitment to Canada's most vulnerable. We've discussed the program with the BC government, and it has attracted a lot of positive attention. Finally, we will help ensure that every Canadian is able to transition to the digital world. Our commitments to be an effective competitor, to expand and enhance our networks, and to offer more affordable options to Canadians will enable consumers and businesses to flourish as our economy rapidly evolves. Our plan will also help the Canadian broadcasting system transition to a more digital world. Our merger with Shaw comes at a time of both generational challenges and opportunities. Canada has to adapt and evolve to ensure all of its citizens can enjoy the benefits of living and working in a digital age. By addressing these challenges head-on, Rogers and Shaw are committed to ensuring that every Canadian can participate in the digital future. No one should be left behind. Your approval of this transaction will help us achieve this vision by ensuring the Canadian broadcasting system can respond to these challenges. Together, Rogers and Shaw will make more possible. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I think your mic is not working. Yeah, it's red. It's just not streaming. No. Can you try your
Just pause
mic,
for one moment.
Ms. Wheeler? Just to see, can you just speak in it to see if it works? No.
Testing.
Switching.
Because I can go there. Okay. Should I take it from the top? Or just pick up where I am? Okay,
You can continue. Thank you.
thank you. All right, adjusting. So we have a plan that embraces this digital transition, which is specifically tailored for the Canadian broadcasting system. It has 4 pillars. The first is to be customer-focused. Delivering world-class experiences and services to more Canadians is at the heart of this transaction. We will offer next-generation features, functionalities, and services that will provide our customers with superior technology, enhanced choice, and ease of use. Almost 28 million Canadians now watch streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, or Disney+. Millions of households also rely on a digital cable subscription to access their favorite TV shows and news and sports programming. By providing seamless access to both linear channels and digital streaming services on our IPTV platform, we will encourage these customers to remain in the regulated system. Our strategy is to marry linear and streaming options so that customers can easily access any program through the same platform. Ignite TV's advanced features such as voice search, voice activation, and its intuitive user interface are a compelling combination for our customers. These features help customers discover Canadian programming services and help those programmers maintain their audiences and revenues, ensuring continued investment in Canadian programming. Rogers' plan for migrating Shaw customers to Ignite will be guided by our customer-first philosophy. We will give them the flexibility to decide how to migrate, and we will provide them with incentives to do so. Each customer will transition over time in as seamless a manner as possible. We also recognize that some Canadians face economic barriers to accessing the broadcasting system. As mentioned a few moments ago, we will offer our low-cost internet and TV bundles through our Connected for Success program to consumers in the West. The program provides eligible Canadians with access to low-cost, high-speed internet services and the option to add on TV packages. It is available to hundreds of thousands of Canadians who are eligible for rent geared to income, federal guaranteed income support, or provincial disability and income benefits. It was recently expanded to involve Indigenous communities and participants in the Federal Assistance Program for Refugees. Our second pillar is network investment. Our ability to provide customers with access to world-class networks, platforms, and services depends on the investments we make. The importance of this was emphasized by the Commission in its 2018 Harnessing Change report. Investing in Canada's networks, acquiring new technologies, and building advanced platforms is necessary for Rogers and our programming partners to remain competitive.
Our third pillar is to partner with Canadian independent programmers as we both transition to new digital business models. We know there are costs associated with this transition and that these programmers have concerns about the impact it will have on their linear revenue. This would be the case regardless of the merger. Unfortunately, no programmer can afford to continue to rely solely on the legacy linear business model. As the Commission has recognized previously, everyone must adapt to the digital world by reaching consumers where they are watching programs. We are committing to help independent programmers with their digital transition in 3 important ways. First, we commit to distribute a minimum of 40 independent discretionary programming services on each of our BDUs for a 3-year period. Separately, Rogers has reached agreements with a number of independent programmers to continue carriage of their services post-closing and beyond. Second, we will provide product and development assistance that will enable independent programmers to offer their services on both linear and digital platforms. This includes helping them create new apps or other outlets so that they can offer their content on Rogers and on third-party digital platforms. Third, we will help independent programmers with access to set-top box data in 2 ways. First, as of April 1st, 2022, we will provide set-top box reporting on request at no cost on an annual basis until the Numeris Enhanced Television Audience Measurement System is fully implemented. Second, we will help independent programmers by providing set-top box data free of charge for use on the Cinch platform. Cinch is a self-serve ad buying platform that allows advertisers to plan and purchase their advertising campaigns online. Rogers is a current user of the Cinch platform and is familiar with its many benefits and associated costs. Independent programmers who choose to participate in Cinch will benefit from Rogers providing set-top box data free of charge as this data is required to build the audience segmentations used in booking advertising campaigns. In making these commitments, we will provide independent programmers with a viable path to migrating their services to a digital future.
Our fourth pillar is to invest in Canadian programming. There are 4 aspects. First, we will implement the tangible benefits package that we've submitted as part of our application. It is dedicated to supporting film festivals in prairie provinces and BC, many of which are devoted to films created or produced by individuals who have historically been underrepresented in the television and film industries. Second, we will maintain our support for the creation of children's programming by continuing to fund the Shaw Rocket Fund. This will allow both the Shaw Rocket Fund and the Rogers Documentary and Cable Network funds to achieve their mandates. We believe our proposal to combine the contributions we make and split the money evenly between the 2 funds is the best way to ensure each remains accessible to a diversity of content producers in the children's, drama, and documentary genres. Third, this transaction represents a transformational opportunity for City News to grow its audience in Western markets, where it is not as popular as other news outlets. We will do this by increasing investment in our Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, and Winnipeg newsrooms.
Enfin, nous continuerons d'investir dans la programmation communautaire.
We'll continue to invest in community programming to reflect Indigenous communities and other underserved communities throughout the country. We will integrate Shaw Spotlight to our Rogers TV service and its local relevant programming, all the while benefiting from the deep and authentic links that Shaw has created with these communities during dozens of years of service. With Indigenous communities in Canada, we will identify and eliminate obstacles to access, and we will increase investments in the communication model that Shaw Spotlight has developed in its coverage zone. To do this, we will create new roles for the development and support of programming directed by Indigenous peoples and for this community. These ambassadors of the Indigenous community will mobilize and equip creators so that their voices will be heard on Rogers and Shaw's platforms.
Our commitments to inclusive and community-based programming and to increased investments in local news.
Beginning, City News has been on the ground in the community, covering the issues and events that mainstream news couldn't or wouldn't.
The history of City News is one of innovative local coverage, serving local viewers as only City News can.
With the combined resources of Rogers and Shaw, we'll be able to increase that coverage, build on our collective strengths as community partners, and amplify our distinct, diverse brand of on-the-street news. We will do this by making unprecedented investments in our local newsrooms that will support the creation of 12 live annual multi-platform news specials in the Western markets, an Indigenous news content team to deliver Indigenous perspectives and mentoring opportunities for the next generation of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit journalists. We'll expand our Western newsrooms, add a Western specialist to the Ottawa Bureau to bring a Western perspective to government issues, and create a Western-focused 24/7 digital news service, helping keep Canadians informed on platforms outside of traditional sources, reaching, connecting, and listening to Canadians from coast to coast. That's the City News philosophy, committed to our community and every Canadian. And where traditional news coverage stops, that's where community television shines. Rogers TV and Shaw Spotlight bring best-in-class local programming to diverse communities within their markets. We'll continue to build on Rogers TV's in-depth coverage of local public affairs and events, and expand on Spotlight's Indigenous community programming, hiring up to 10 new Indigenous community ambassadors to mentor the next generation of Indigenous content creators.
You know, it's so important that we're able to tell our stories about our community, but it's also very important that we're able to tell them ourselves.
Rogers and Shaw, stronger together, ensuring that every Canadian feels their voice is heard and their perspective is honored.
In closing, We want to thank the Commission for giving us the opportunity to outline our vision for Canada's digital future and the essential role that this transaction will play in making it possible. This transaction puts in motion a business plan that will bring connectivity and dynamic innovation to a growing number of Canadians. It will increase competition and choice in the West, including communities that do not have any competitive alternatives today. It will bridge the digital divide by enhancing and expanding our networks to areas that do not have broadband and cable services today. It will present affordable options for lower income and other marginalized Canadians in the West. And it will provide a platform for Canadian consumers and businesses to participate in the digital future and offer new opportunities for Indigenous communities and creators to connect with each other and the world. We'll emerge from this transaction with an unwavering commitment to ensure that Canada can realize its full potential in the digital world. For the Canadian broadcasting system, this transaction will provide a foundation for each element to succeed. The Commission's objectives of an increased choice, flexibility, and diversity that underline the policies it adopted as part of the Let's Talk TV proceeding can only be achieved if all stakeholders embrace consumer choice, innovation, and investment. Approving our application will serve the public interest and will ultimately help ensure that Canada's broadcasting policy objectives will be achieved in a rapidly evolving environment. By bringing our two companies together, we will make more possible and provide a brighter future for Canadians and our country. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, and staff. We look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wade. Thank you all for the overview. We do indeed have some questions for you, and perhaps I will kick it off. You mentioned just at the end of your remarks that it will contribute, proposed transaction will contribute to the Canadian broadcasting system, and reading the interventions, I note that in your supplementary brief, you discussed both that the transaction, in your view, is consistent with the Commission's longstanding view that integration and consolidation among terrestrial BDUs will result in greater efficiency and cost savings and service improvements. And you also indicate that it would further the objectives of the Broadcasting Act, specifically relating to broadcast distribution, in terms of efficient delivery of programming at affordable rates using the most effective technologies available at reasonable cost, is the summary I have in front of me. Perhaps we can start there with just saying, can you give me a specific example or two, some concrete examples, as to exactly how the integration of Shaw's broadcasting services with those of Rogers will in fact further the objectives of the Broadcasting Act and the efficient delivery of programming?
Sure. Why don't I start, and perhaps my colleagues can kick in. One of the most obvious aspects to me is simply by making our cable service available to areas in the West that are not able to receive it today from Shaw's terrestrial BDUs. So the cable industry is regulated in a way to promote Canadian content and carry contents of all kinds. And to the extent that we expand our cable networks to new communities and to new groups of people who did not have the benefit of it before, I believe that that contributes to the Canadian policy objectives. But moreover, I think it's very important that none of us have been immune in the broadcast distribution industry from the impact that global competitors have had And the CRTC's monitoring report has steadily showed a negative CAGR for the Canadian BDUs. And so we've had to adapt and evolve just as everyone else. In the case of Rogers, what we have done here is transform rather to an all IPTV platform. And in so doing, what we have been able to do with that and what we would be doing with the Shaw systems and in these areas that are currently not covered today is addressing Canadian content and giving Canadian programmers and creators an ability to showcase their content on an IP platform that includes services like SmartStream, which we currently offer, through app ingestion into the Comcast platform, or through fast channels. And these allow, in turn, Canadian programmers to find audiences beyond just their role today as linear programs. Maybe I could go on here, but maybe I'll turn this over to Eric or Pam as to some of the, and Pam, as to some of the other benefits and how they relate to the Canadian broadcasting policy objectives. And I'd be remiss as well if Susan might have something to say here.
Okay, thank you, Ted. So one of the biggest threats that the Canadian broadcasting system has is that pretty much on any given day, any Canadian can walk into their living room, turn on their TV, go straight to Netflix, go straight to Amazon Prime Video, go straight to Disney, and completely bypass the Canadian broadcasting system. So one of the most important things about IPTV is that it actually takes those over-the-top giants, it takes Canadian content, and it seamlessly integrates all that information, and it presents it together. So when you're on our homepage or you're looking at On Demand, you'll see assets from Blue Ant and WildBrain next to assets from Netflix or from City. So it's really important that as customers experience IPTV, they see all the options that are in front of them immediately. And by bringing these two sets of content together, customers can still access Netflix because they're going to. They can still access Disney Plus because they're going to. 28 million do it every day. But what it allows them to do is see Canadian content and broadcast content in the same way, and basically allows us to put it on almost equal footing. And there are a lot of ways that we can do that and bring it forward. But at essence, that's the importance of IPTV. It presents the broadcast content in the same way that it presents the digital content. It keeps Canadians connected to the Canadian broadcasting system, which is something we feel is really important. We can talk more about that later, but for now, I'll turn it over to Pam to add some more.
Just had another further point to add, Mr. Chair. One of the things that Rogers did post the Let's Talk TV proceeding is that we wholeheartedly embraced the notion of choice. We recognized where the Commission wanted to go. Our customers were already wanting us to go there. So we very quickly got with the program, and since then, we have got quite a large array of choices for our customers at different price points where they can take advantage of choosing the services that they want to watch. So once they've bought through the basic package, or starter as we call it, they have a vast array of choices available to them at different price points. Shaw did the same thing, but not perhaps in the same way as Rogers did. So whereas today we offer a variety of flex packs, flex 20, flex 10, flex 5. These are packages of services that customers can choose in those packages what they want to pay for, as well as obviously we have standalone services at different price points. Shaw has sort of more focused on the larger, marketed the larger packages, and we have very much marketed the flex packs. So I think we bring that knowledge and experience in that arena out west to our new Western customers, and I think that they will definitely find that advantageous, both from a price and a choice perspective.
If I may add just one thing Chair. Dean noted the other day, and I raise this only because it moves this from some conceptual point to a real point, that Rogers actually grew its cable base in the third quarter. That is unusual in the BDU market. And that is as the result of keeping Canadians in the Canadian system. And I believe that that falls squarely within the broadcasting policy objectives. What you'll hear as well a lot today, in answer to your questions, I assume, will be about the scale that this transaction brings. And with scale, that allows us as a combined entity to further invest in high fixed cost technologies that further advance Canadian programming into a digital age. And I think that's actually tied back in its effect to the broadcast policy objectives. And then finally, sorry to go on, but the IPTV platform does a lot of other things. It has accessibility options that wouldn't otherwise be available to us for various peoples of different abilities. It has things like an IPTV mobile app that allows people to see the content while they're on the go. We want to meet customers with content wherever they are, however they live, wherever they work, wherever they play. We want that content to remain relevant to the maximum extent possible and available to them. So I'll let it sit there, but that would be our answer.
Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you. You covered a lot, and your colleague covered a lot of ground there. We'll dig into a few of those sub-themes, I'm sure, over the course of the morning. In both in your answer to my question and in your remarks, you have made a number of references to the competitive landscape and the competitive environment. And in your submissions, you've, if you will, de-emphasized the issue of a national market share of the combined entities and rather said we should focus on local/regional communities as there is no overlap between terrestrial BDUs. I guess, and also secondarily, you note that DTH distribution services are not necessarily seen as a close substitute for terrestrial services. I guess, given that, can we just start in talking about competitive marketplace? So where is the competition enhanced? Doesn't appear that there would be increased competition in those communities, unless you're exclusively referring to competition with TELUS or Bell or another alternative. But I'm not quite getting your point that a combination of Shaw and Rogers will create more competition.
Sure. The point about creating greater competition really happens at the fringes of Shaw's network today, where, again, the word you will hear a number of times, at least from me, that with additional scale, increased scale, the combined entity will be able to invest in expanding services beyond from the fringe of the network to areas that are not addressed by anyone in some circumstances or only by one BDU. In the West, that would likely be TELUS in BC and Alberta. In Saskatchewan, it would be SaskTel. And in Manitoba, it would be BCE. So there is an instance of increased competition. But I believe there's more. And the more is all related all IPTV platforms are not alike. The Rogers Ignite platform, powered by the Comcast organization, is a state-of-the-art, best-in-class IPTV service. It is not the same as TELUS's IPTV service or Bell's IPTV service, or indeed SaskTel's or anyone else's IPTV service. It is unique, and it will provide improvements, in our view, to viewer experience, access to applications, an all-in-one content aggregation scheme that allows all of these other functionalities that I think are unparalleled. And that will lead to an increased competitive dynamic. And I'll leave it there, and perhaps you want to delve a little bit more into that, Chair. But
pardon me, it's the mute button problem, even at a hearing. Yeah, there's a few threads I think I'd like to pick up on. Just going back to the market share issue, obviously numerous interveners have raised concern. As I described your position, it was we shouldn't pay much attention to that national share. But even if you look at a regional basis, when you combine, Bell and Rogers together would hold the vast majority of market share in Ontario. Similar situation in the West when you take TELUS into account. So there is, on its face, an increase in concentration, and obviously that has of concern to some interveners. What's the incentive, for example, for the two BDUs to offer differentiated BDU packages? You're talking about how the IPTV platform will be superior and offer many goodies, so to speak, to consumers. But will we see a differentiation of product?
I would say yes, but if you'll allow me to go back to I think the premise of the question where, excuse me, where you started. Bell, I know that this issue has come up on the record, but our friends at Bell have attempted to conflate a couple of issues here, and I think it's worth speaking about it. What this transaction means in terms of Rogers and Shaw does not, and you had asked in your previous question about increasing competition, and I tried to provide some examples of that. What it does not do is lessen competition or prevent competition. We do not today compete in any terrestrial BDU market with Shaw, none. So what we will be doing as a combined entity, it will have some national market share, but the smallest relevant market that you should define or could define is where we would actually compete. And in any of those markets, there is no diminution of competition in the marketplace. So I would simply state that. You then mentioned that we would somehow become more concentrated in Ontario, and that one confuses me slightly, because we would pick up Thunder Bay and Sault Ste. Marie, but if memory serves, but I don't think those would move the dial.
No, not a question of moving the aisle. It was more of a descriptor that simply that the combined market share. If one is looking at market share, if you look at Ontario, the combined market share of Rogers and Bell is very, very large.
Yeah.
No more complex.
And that's the situation today. That was the situation for the last 60 years. Or whatever, whenever Bell launched into the BDU space, but that's true. But
understood. Do you have a sense that talked a little bit about supply there from the demand side. Do you observe different consumer demands for content in the West and Shaw's territory as opposed to in Rogers' territory? You've described the benefits of an integrated platform. I'm just wondering if there's, if your sense is that the demands are different.
Well, I'll start there, and then perhaps I'll hand that one off to Dean, well, one of the two deans. Both of them are, one's from Shaw and one is from Rogers, but happens to be resident in Calgary.
And there's no risk of you asking Dean to answer the question, I guess.
No, I can just say Dean, and one of them will do this. Just from experience myself, there are indeed demand characteristics for content in the West that might be different from Ontario. There might be third language programming differences. There might be official language programming demand differences. That different types of content, different types of sports content, these things would all be different on a regional basis, and you have to be adaptive to the customers that you address and provide them with the content that they desire in the most compatible and convenient format. But I'll turn it over to the experts in this regard with Dean Shake, who is the cable fellow for
From
Shaw.
the cable fellow. Happy to start. And, competition out West is intense. And I think this is a theme that we've raised with Commission frequently about the intense competition between TELUS and Shaw out West. And what's really exciting for us about this transaction is what's already been discussed, and that's the migration to IP. There are a bit of differences, not just in what Rogers offers from the telcos, but in terms of what Rogers and Shaw currently offer. As you may know, we're largely legacy-based still, and even in our IPTV platform, we still have a hybrid platform that relies on QAM, which is still a legacy product, and we're moving toward a full IP product. And we're excited about Rogers' support for accelerating that migration, because there are some differences in terms of the features that are available on Rogers Ignite from Blue Curve, and we're excited about making those available, because I think what we're describing is it's already an incredibly intensely competitive environment, especially between Shaw and TELUS. And this is only going to intensify that competition. And competition is good for customers. It's good for consumers. It's good for innovation. It's good for investment. And it's not just about the features today. It's about the features tomorrow. And I think that's why we're very excited about the transaction.
Thank you, Dean. I can say that knowing that I'll be safe as well. I guess another aspect of having a larger number of national subscribers, at least in theory, it increases, I guess, your negotiating strength. Do you anticipate that the combined entity would be able to negotiate better bulk rates? And I guess you can guess the follow-on question, would that lead to lower rates for consumers if that is in fact the case?
Why don't I take a crack at that? And so to the extent that, supply and demand operate as traditional economics would suggest, given an increment in size, like for any product, if you want to buy 10,000 pens versus one pen, you might get, the incremental pen at a lower incremental cost or unit cost than buying one pen alone. So I would say, would we potentially be able to negotiate lower per unit rates based on the kind of current frameworks around penetration and in some cases volume? Yes. Is that an unfair outcome? No. And the reason largely for that is that we operate in a highly regulated, as you people know.
That's what we do, Mr. Woodhead.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. A highly regulated environment. So there are a series, frankly, a comprehensive framework around wholesale rates, with the factors for assessing what is fair market value. There are additionally, staff is available to us for staff mediation where we are unable to conclude commercial arrangements. There is a standstill rule, and there are undue preference rules. So there's a pretty comprehensive regime in place to protect against any kind of behavior that would discriminate against or prefer one stakeholder or another. And I think that should give the Commission comfort. And all of that flowed out of the, or following the Let's Talk TV.
You're jumping into answers to my next bunch of questions, so I'll pause you there on safeguards. We will
Very
come
good.
back. We will come back to that. I was more focused in the latter question on not the concerns about it, but the possibility that it could result in lower rates to consumers. But you've answered the question.
The lower rates to consumers would, if there's a lower input cost, you might expect that there would be lower rates.
We'll leave it there, as neither you or I are economists, but I accept the analysis or the point. But going back to rates for a second, it was interesting in your opening remarks, you noted, or in response to an earlier question, you noted that the packaging, I think it was Ms. Dinsmore actually, who made the reference to Shaw's packages tended to be larger, Rogers perhaps into smaller bundles, which might appeal to certain consumers. But I do note that the average revenue per user for Rogers across its operations is $72 and change, according to my notes, whereas the average revenue per user for Shaw is more than $10 less than that, $61 and change. So what's going to happen with that?
I'll just start. I mean, when you use an ARPU metric, that could mean a lot of things. It could mean Rogers customers take more services, even though there's flex packs and abilities to not buy through to get particular programming you want. It also could refer to a different competitive dynamic in BC and Alberta primarily. And I don't, in fact, know the answer to that question. But I might defer to Eric here to talk a little bit about that.
And maybe just as you answer it, just a sense of what Rogers' strategy is with respect to ARPU, with respect to Shaw customers or the lower average rate.
Sure. So when you take a customer-first approach, right, we don't have necessarily an ARPU strategy for customers, right? Our game plan is to provide incredible services at competitive prices. So I'd say, Mr. Chair, that there are three things to consider. One, Dean had mentioned earlier, Connected for Success. So the introduction of that program into the West is going to bring lower rates to eligible Canadians. So there's a baseline there that's incredibly compelling. It's a one-of-a-kind program. It's unique. We can go into it later, but there are really fantastic affordable rates coming to Western Canada as part of CFS. In terms of what we're planning to do in the marketplace, we're going to do a couple things. We talked about introducing a more robust version of IPTV than Shaw has. But once we do that, we've got to compete with TELUS and anybody else in that marketplace. So the expectation is that we will compete at rates that it takes to win, right? So it would be foolish for us to think that we can show up and raise prices in that type of competitive dynamic. The plan is to play to win with a great service and competitive prices. The other thing that we're going to do in the marketplace relative to competing, we talked about IPTV, but Ted also mentioned a product called SmartStream. SmartStream leverages the same technology as IPTV. It's the same set-top box. It's got the voice search and the voice activation. It's got the great discovery that we talked about, but it's dedicated to solely to over-the-top and digital providers. So it becomes an access point. There are times when all of us are trying to figure out, where is this content? Where do I find Canada's Drag Race? Where do I find Hudson and Rex? Where do I find other things like, you take a look at something like a show called Daredevil that started on Netflix but's now part of Disney, right? There are different places and different things that happen, and you can actually spend minutes debating with the family, where do I find this service, right? With OTT aggregated into one place with SmartStream, you don't have to do that anymore. You just say the name of the show, or if you're me, you sometimes can't remember the show. You're trying to watch Jack Ryan, but all you can think of is John Krasinski. You can say the actor's name, and you'll get the opportunity to go to that show as well. We're going to introduce that product that is complementary to broadband services. It's a video product, but it's focused on digital, and that product's available today in Ontario for $5. So we plan to come into the market. We're going to compete with great products, and we're going to compete at competitive price points. And we're going to introduce a safety net for eligible Canadians that can't afford services on their own.
Thank you. It just made me think that that'll just completely reduce the power of me sitting on the remote. They're just going to use their voices to change a channel to a program I don't want to watch. Maybe just to sum up on that point, if the commission were to approve the transaction, then what assurances can you provide that monthly rates for the Shaw subscribers won't be raised?
If I could ask Dean to respond to that one.
The best assurance you have is the most incredibly aggressive competitor in the West, which is TELUS. Raising rates isn't an act alone, right? It's an act in a marketplace against another competitor. And the West has been actually an incredibly aggressive price space. And we would have to respond accordingly, Mr. Chairman. And in a world where subscribers matter for the content that we want to sell and for the leverage of the network that we want to build, we'd be foolish to do anything other than be aggressive in that marketplace. And aggressive is not just in the offers and the prices that we put in front of customers, but it is also the addition of value add on top of it. SmartStream is an inexpensive way to stay in the system, and it does actually take our ARPU down. But we also do in the East have things like home automation, smart home monitoring, which are actually value add that drive ARPU up, but they're not necessarily comparable pound for pound against a TV package. They bring value, and it's more for more. So it's a little bit more complicated than just simply the movement of ARPU. But I can tell you, our intent with the $1 billion build out West is we would have to aggressively fill it. And I think that tells you exactly where we'd be heading in terms of our own aggression in the marketplace.
Just as a follow-on, Mr. Chair, in this same issue was addressed to some degree in the 2016 BCE MTS proceeding, where one of the parties there had asked for a rate freeze, and the commission determined that with the $25 basic package and a variety of other initiatives that came out of Let's Talk TV, that was not appropriate. So I'll leave that there.
Thank you. Maybe moving for a second over to DTH, Satellite Distribution Services. Again, in the supplementary brief, not to put words in your mouth, but effectively, Rogers has indicated that they will simply step into Shaw's operational shoes and run it as it has been run for more than 20 years. I guess staying on that price theme, can it be inferred from that statement that there's no intention on raising the rates for Shaw Direct service?
Again, we face in that space a competitor with Bell. Our ability to raise rates in some sort of way on our own, as Dean said, it's not an event in and of itself. It's a response to costs and a response to the market itself. So no, we would stand in the shoes of Shaw. We would compete in the markets that Shaw competes in today nationally. These are rural markets typically, and we would anticipate no pricing changes that would be different than any pricing changes Shaw might have introduced over the last 20 years that it's operated Shaw Direct.
Thank you. I've got a little follow-on and one other question, and then I think we are going to pause because we do have a requirement to go in camera at a certain point this morning, but I do want to finish this thread. I would note, Mr. Woodhead, that I understand you have a competitor in the DTH space, but perhaps customer switching is not as simple, particularly in more rural areas, as you have to change the receiving equipment and so on. But I take the point that there is a competitive alternative. But speaking to the issue of rural and remote areas, just summary question, do you anticipate any repercussions for those communities? It is one of the unusual features, I would say, of Canada that you can, no matter essentially wherever you live in the country, get the same BDU service at the same price, which is an unusual, as I said, situation, and therefore beneficial to those living in more remote communities. So I guess just as a last summary point, any other repercussions that you can think of for those rural remote communities?
Yeah, I mean, obviously these services are important to people in rural and remote areas. We understand that. Today we don't operate a DTH undertaking, obviously. As I've said, we would stand in Shaw's shoes, and there is nothing particular to this transaction or related to this transaction that would change any of that. But perhaps I might ask Dean if he had any comments there.
No, I agree, Ted, Mr. Chairman, but I also, the march of time and technology by both ourselves and our competitors will put other options in front of those rural and remote folks. So today, you choose DTH because you don't have another form available. It's an excellent service, but as you know, it's kind of long in the tooth and is a form of distribution that's unique to video. Doesn't bring you any connectivity. The march of fiber expansion, the addition of fixed wireless to existing connectivity, gives other options for those rural and remote folks to get access to the Canadian broadcasting system and to connectivity. So that change is frankly probably the more powerful change of foot that helps us deal with those who use satellite across the country. And true for us, our actions, we're probably most aggressive right now in terms of our expansion plans, but our competitors, as you well know, are doing the same.
Thank you, Mr. Prevost. I'm going to turn it to Madam Secretary.
Thank you. We will now take a 15-minute break to allow us to go in camera with Rogers Shaw. We will stop all broadcasting live feed. We will shut them down and clear the hearing room. A confidential transcript will be prepared, and a bridge version of the discussion held during the in-camera session will be placed on the public record as soon as practically possible. When the in-camera session is complete, we will tweet the time we will resume questioning for Rogers and Shaw, which will be after the lunch break. We will now take a 15-minute break.